Lecture 15 for Western Civ 1, The Islamic Contributions to Western Civilization. For a devotional thought this day, I'd have you think about Deuteronomy chapter 18, where Moses prophesies regarding the future. In verse 15, he says, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your brothers. You must listen to him. For this is what you asked the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, 'Let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, or see his great fire any more, or we will die.' The Lord said to me, 'What they say is good. I'll raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers. I'll put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. If anyone does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name, I myself will call him to account. But a prophet who presumes to speak in my name anything I have not commanded him to say, or a prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, must be put to death.'" So what we find out here is that there is a prophet who's coming in the future, and we get here indications about subsequent prophets to Moses. Moses is sometimes identified as the greatest of prophets, but what Moses says is that there's one who's coming after him who is greater than him. Now, there would be many prophets after Moses, but who's the one who's greater than Moses? Certainly, any time we have revelation from God, we should listen to that revelation from God, but we need to test that revelation. Again, any prophet who presumes to speak in God's name is taking on a serious task, and if he's a false prophet, he should be executed according to this text under the Jewish law. And we should listen to someone who speaks the words of God, but we need to test people. Do the things that this person says match up with what God has previously revealed, or is there something new? The Muslims will often look towards this text and say that Moses was speaking about the coming of Muhammad. One who comes after him is greater than him. Moses is recognized as the great lawgiver of the Jews, whose revelations would establish their society. But as Christians, we recognize that Moses is talking about the coming of Jesus, when God comes in the flesh and reveals himself to us as Jesus Christ. The question of who you listen to is very, very important, and what prophets you believe. This will set Western civilization and the Eastern Islamic civilization at odds with each other over their estimation of Jesus. The Muslims will say, Jesus is a great prophet, praise be unto him. But Christians would say he's the Son of God, and we should listen to him. Certainly, the estimation of Jesus will make for a lot of conflict between Muslims and Christians in the years to come. But what we find in 1 John chapter 4 is that people who deny Jesus are antichrists. So we want to pay attention to what people have to say about Jesus. The Arabs living in the resource-poor areas of the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula were long-time distant ancestors to Ishmael, as we read in the book of Genesis. But the Arabs would be tertiary heirs to Rome. They benefited from the legacy given to the Byzantine East. But culturally and religiously, they were different, but they nonetheless would preserve aspects of classical culture that would in time be reintroduced in the West. And they're going to have long trade connections through which they'll learn some things which they will bring and transfer also to the West. So what we're going to find is the Arabs made a significant cultural and set of technical contributions of their own to Western civilization, and the interaction between the Islamic world and the West in time would promote Western cultural development, and some aspects would promote Western dominance. As we go back to the early periods in Arabia, in pre-Islamic Arabia, and think about the situation there, what we find is that politically it was an area which was dominated by tribalism, as factious tribes fought with each other in razzias, but geographically they're rather isolated. Beyond the general comfortable reach of Rome or later Constantinople. They're way out on the periphery as far as the Roman and the Byzantine empires were concerned. Economically, they developed some interesting strategies for subsistence, as some people lived by pastoralism, grazing on meager forage for animals. Some places in the mountains there was more forage than others. They also developed specialized agriculture where they could grow crops which were highly prized, particularly because of the smells of the sap that they might exude. And so the Arabs from early on had a very lucrative spice trade, and we find the Nabatean Arabs brought that into the Roman Empire and made themselves very wealthy. As middlemen, they would also engage in a certain amount of mercantilism, where they would trade in luxury goods. And we had seen back in the 3rd century how the city of Palmyra grew to great prominence because their business in luxury trade, exchanging luxury commodities from the Orient with the Roman Empire. So economically, there's a number of different strategies were there, but certainly the trade centers would be at oases along caravan routes. And culturally, as we look at this society, we find they were rather patriarchal and tribal in character. Religiously, there's a great deal of religious syncretism, where there's traditional Arab polytheism, worshipping the various forces of creation around them. But there had been an influx of Jewish influence, particularly with Jewish rabbinical thought, and there was also Persian influence with the Zoroastrian religion, and then also Christians had moved beyond the boundaries of the Roman Empire. Some of those Christians were Orthodox, others would be heretics, bringing a variety of thoughts with them, like that of the Docetists, for example. Islam originates in connection with Muhammad. And so we want to look first here at the background of Muhammad, a man who was born around the year 570 to a tribe, the Quraysh tribe in Arabia. He was very soon orphaned, and as a young orphan, he's not in the best of positions, but he has family connections, and he's going to serve as something of a caravaneer, and eventually he'll marry the boss. He marries Khadijah, a widow who was engaged in the caravan trade with luxury goods, and this would bring him to prominence and give him time to be thinking about various things. At about age 40, this would be around the year AD 610 in our calendar, Muhammad began to have revelations. He took time off to climb Mount Hira near Mecca, where he lived, and sought revelation. Now, he had some holy men that he'd encountered along the way who said that he was going to do great things, and perhaps this helped to stimulate something of his aspirations along the way. But he lived there in Mecca and would have revelations on Mount Hira, where he would be told to write. Even though he was not a literate person, he's supposed to memorize the things that are told to him, as he would believe that Jibril, this would be their name for Gabriel, came and revealed things to him, and subsequently in his life he would have other revelations along the way. And as he came down off the mountain, he thought that he was going mad and was quite concerned, but his wife Khadijah would be his first converts, affirming him and encouraging him. There would be other family members who would encourage him early on, and the result would be that he would develop a series of doctrines. Now, the initial reception of Islam in Arabia there was negative. Certainly in Arabia there was widespread polytheism. There was a mixture of monotheists who were Jews or Christians. But as he comes along, it was already a very religious community, and this would lead to some negative reaction as he comes as a very rigorous monotheist, saying that he's got new revelation, and these other people already have their prophets that they ascribe to, and his revelations would be different. And as he came proclaiming his doctrines, he would have opposition in Mecca, and as a result he would be forced eventually to flee to the city of Medina, a couple hundred miles to the north. There he would originally have something of a cooperation with some Jewish tribes, and there would be some local tribal skirmishes. He would claim to have further revelations, and some of these revelations allegedly helped to cement his leadership. And eventually, after a long period of conflict, he would be able to return to Mecca, where he would cleanse the local temple, something called the Kaaba, which was filled with idols that he had spoken against before, and this is what got him kicked out of the city of Mecca. But he wouldn't live for too terribly long. So what are those doctrines of Islam that continue today, which were so offensive, and where do we find out about them? Well, the chief source that we'd go to would be the Quran. It contains 114 surahs. We might consider these as being chapters. They're not organized in a chronological pattern or a topical pattern. They're arranged in terms of their length. And so typically these surahs are going to go from longest to shortest. So the early surahs can be many, many pages long, and the later surahs are usually just a paragraph or so. Beyond the inscribed Quran that we have today, this was originally just memorized, and it would be a generation or so before these things are written down. There would also be various traditions of his followers who recorded the sayings of Muhammad, something that's known as the Hadith literature. There's lots of dispute about the Hadith literature, these traditions. But in the Quran and in the Hadith literature, there are 5 basic pillars of Islam. The primary item here is that one must become a Muslim, that is, one must become a person who submits to the will of Allah. And the 5 basic teachings are, first of all, that you need to publicly confess their creed. Now, we'd seen creeds before in the Christian world, but this creed has the advantage of being much, much more simple. There's really just 2 components. That is, there's no God but Allah, and secondly, that Muhammad is his prophet. This is what's known as the Shahada Creed. A person is sometimes identified as being a Muslim if they would say publicly, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. So, what we need to understand here is that, as they say, there's no God but Allah. To associate anything or anybody else with Allah would be shirk, the worst of sins. And certainly they are going to see Christians as doing this, because Christians say that God the Father is God, and God the Son is God, and God the Spirit is God. As Christians, we would say there's one God, comprised of these 3 divine persons, but the Islamic world would see Christians as being tritheist. It didn't make sense to them, and they rejected this idea. And so they will speak highly of Jesus. Jesus is seen to be a prophet. Praise be unto him. Every time they speak the name of Isa, that would be their name for Jesus, they would say, praise be unto him. But they would never recognize Jesus as being the Son of God who died on the cross for sinners. Their focus is on Allah, on God. And God is all-powerful. This is why you oftentimes hear Muslims today saying, Allahu Akbar. God is great, God is almighty, and everything that happens according to them is the will of Allah. And so we're going to find that they tend to be somewhat predestinarian or fatalistic in their view of things. But there's, at the same time, expectations that people have a responsibility. In this regard, they're very much like Rabbinic Judaism, where these people are going to be very much interested in trying to be good enough to satisfy Allah. And so, after ascribing to the creed, the second thing that one must do is to pray. This is the Salat, where there's 5 prescribed prayers per day. One can do other personal prayers if you wish, but this praying is formulated in a certain pattern, and there's certain actions that take place where one has to come in a pure state to pray, and to pray in a specified manner, where one goes through various motions and bows down, putting one's head on the ground, and then standing back up. And so this happens 5 times a day, and continues on in the Islamic world today. The third item is that one would give zakat. This would be, rather than a tithe, a tenth, one would give a 40th, so 2.5% of one's income should be given to the poor. And one should observe Ramadan. This is a holy month where one should fast, like Muhammad had for a month, and not eat or drink anything during the daylight hours. And then finally, that if one is possible, one goes on a pilgrimage to Mecca on a Hajj. A person who has been on Hajj is known as a Haji. So these are the 5 basic pillars of Islam. And in this religion, while the view is that Allah will save who He chooses, and Allah is all sovereign, and sometimes they get to be rather predestinarian in view of things, nonetheless they expect that people are going to be good in that they are going to pray, they're going to give, they're going to observe certain activities. And so what we'll find is that there's a number of schools of interpretation and lots of disputes amongst Muslims about being correct before religious expectations. Beyond these 5 pillars, there are a number of religious prohibitions. Some of these we'd find parallels with in Judaism, where they will be very careful to avoid pork products and blood. Again, those are things that we would recognize that Jews had restrictions on before. They're also concerned about things which might influence one's perception, and so they're going to be against alcohol, the use of alcoholic beverages. And they're also going to be against charging interest. Again, both the prohibitions against pork, blood, and usury are things that we can find amongst the Jews in the Old Testament, under the Old Testament law. As far as the drinking of wine, that was something that Christians certainly permitted and Jews permitted, but they're going to have a restriction on that in Islam. Now, there's a variety of other doctrines that they hold to. And one of these would be that you engage in jihad. This would be struggle. There's a variety of different struggles, but certainly within Islam, what we're going to find is that their Prophet Muhammad's vision of things would be something that embraced the values of the world and didn't accept everything that Jesus had to say. While there's a whole lot of lip service given to honoring Jesus, they do not love their neighbor, and those who are their enemies, they will certainly strike out against and compel to recognize the superiority of their doctrine through means of arms. So jihad will be struggle. Again, some of this is personal struggle, to be a holy person, to be a gracious and generous person, to be a person suitable for Allah. But they'll move this beyond just the personal spiritual struggle into physical struggle. And this is going to be something that we'll find will be an item that's passed on to Christians in the time period of the Crusade. So how is it that a very low population dense area like Arabia, with some economic power and connections, can spread and eventually overcome a great empire like the Byzantine Empire? Well, when Muhammad died, it certainly didn't look too terribly good for things. It was something of a perilous situation for Islam because he had left no sons to succeed him and no clear system of succession. And so his companions would discuss this and take over. But what we're going to find is that soon the social elites will aspire to take over, and it'll move away from just people who were the Prophet's companions and early converts, like his son-in-law Ali, but the first 4 successors of Muhammad would be known as the Rashidun. These are the righteous caliphs, and they're going to begin then in the year 632 when Muhammad dies, and we'll go through these 4 early caliphs. The first was Abu Bakr. Abu in Arabic means father, so this is the father of Bakr, who is the father-in-law of Muhammad. Now, Muhammad had had 10 wives, and he had been an early convert. I believe he's the 3rd convert to Islam after the wife of Muhammad, Khadija, and his son-in-law Ali. So Abu Bakr is an early influential tribal leader who is a companion who has fled from Mecca to Medina with Muhammad. But this old man soon died of natural causes. But during his time period, just a couple of years, from 632 to 634, Islam starts to move northward, and they consolidate their hold over the tribes of Arabia and are moving into the southern part of the modern-day country of Jordan. So they're moving out of the Arabian Peninsula towards the north, and they're encountering the fringes of the Byzantine Empire. Abu Bakr was succeeded by Umar. Umar will be a leader for 10 years, and it's during his caliphate that the Battle of the Yarmouk takes place in 635, and as a result, the area of Palestine falls under the domination of the Islamic world. Now, you need to understand this area had been softened up by this long-term battle for decades between the Persians, the Sassanid dynasty, and the Byzantines. And so there's been a great deal of war expenses and losses that have taken place in that gargantuan battle. And so as Islam comes to the area, what they find is that people are tired of warfare, and they come along, and potentially taxes are going to be decreased, and the great powers are weak, and so they're going to be vulnerable. The result will be that the Sassanids will be defeated in 637, and as they continue to expand, they'll capture Alexandria in 641. And so these 10 years of the Prophet Omar are really very, very significant. And today we still have the Mosque of Omar, which is built there in Jerusalem. Sometimes it's known as the Dome of the Rock. So a mosque will be built in Jerusalem, and you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque, according to Muslim tradition. This is the furthest mosque that Muhammad visited, and allegedly from this location he ascended to heaven. And if you go to the Dome of the Rock, you'll see a depression in the rock where supposedly he ascended from. Now, his visit to Jerusalem was something of a mystical voyage, but nonetheless, Jerusalem, as a result, comes to be the third most holy place in Islam, and it sets up a later conflict over the control of this area that persists to this day. So Umar is going to defeat the Byzantines and the Sassanids because they have discontented populations, and he's going to have forces moving across North Africa where there were people who had been unhappy with the Byzantines anyway, and so they're going to move rather quickly because there's disgruntled populations, and lots of times the Byzantines, for example, had depended upon Arab mercenaries along their frontiers to fight for them, and they're going to identify with their fellow ethnic Arabs and will desert from these armies. And economically, the tribute that the Muslims demanded was less than what the Byzantine taxes had been, so there's something of an economic motivation to bow in this direction. Now, certainly were limitations that existed here, and one of the problems would be internal struggles. Omar doesn't live to a ripe old age. Instead, he's assassinated, and taking his place will be Uthman. Uthman will live from 644 until he'll rule as caliph from 644 until 656, and he was a member of Mecca's aristocracy. It's during his time period that an important development happens, in that the prophecies, the revelations that had been given to Muhammad are finally written down, and all other copies are destroyed. So they come up having a singular text, and all dissension is that way cut down. He's going to continue to oversee the spread of Islam towards the west, across North Africa, but like his predecessor, he too will be assassinated. So there's lots of division here. Many people had thought from early on that the successor to Muhammad should be his son-in-law Ali, who is married to Muhammad's daughter Fatima. And he will be the caliph from 656 until 661. Certainly he'd had supporters from all along. But Ali, like his two predecessors, would also be assassinated. He and Fatima had a couple of sons, but what's going to happen is that his sons are going to struggle to survive, and there'll be a massacre of survivors, particularly at a place called Karbala in the year 681. And these sites in what is today Iraq come to be particularly important to the Shiite branch of Islam. The Shia are the followers of Ali. Ali's chief rivals would be the Umayyads. This is a family that will move their center of power to the great merchant city of Damascus. And the Umayyad Caliphate will dominate early Islamic history from 661 until 749. And they will continue to press the expansion of Islam. In fact, in the year 674, they'll besiege Constantinople. While they have pushed all the way to the capital of the Byzantine Empire, they don't have the type of weaponry that's required, and the Byzantines have something known as Greek fire. They can apparently squirt a flammable liquid under pressure towards their enemies, and so this is a devastating weapon, particularly when ships try to attack, and they can set their enemy ships on fire. The Byzantines also have incendiary grenades that they can throw that start fires. And so they don't have the equipment that it takes to capture the great walls of Constantinople, and as a result, their greatest expanse will continue across West Africa, over through Tunisia, where we have the ancient city of Carthage, and eventually from Africa they'll move northward up into the Iberian Peninsula in the year 711. Their great general in the west is General Al-Tariq, and from Al-Tariq we get our word Gibraltar. Gibraltar, the Rock of Gibraltar, recollects the name of Al-Tariq. As they move into the Iberian Peninsula, they come into conflict with the Visigoths, who had come to settle there and would dominate them. And their advance northward towards up into Europe would be stopped north of the Pyrenees between the towns of Tours and Poitiers in the year 732 by Charles Martel. We'll have more to talk about him later as we talk about the Carolinian contributions to Western civilization. Now, the Umayyads, amongst their caliphs, we find that they were not always good Muslims. Certainly some of these people were people who enjoyed the alcoholic beverages of the Byzantines and didn't live particularly pious lives, as we can see some of the depictions from their hunting lodges. Muslims traditionally have been somewhat against the use of imagery and paintings and the like, but the frescoes on the caliph's hunting lodges show that they weren't particularly always good Muslims. But under the Umayyad Caliphate, which lasts about 100 years, there is continued prosperity. Urban situation continues to exist. They continue to use Byzantine coins, and long-distance trade persists, and sometimes there are churches that are transformed, as you see the great Umayyad Mosque at Damascus. And as they move eventually towards Spain, we'll have interest here a little bit later period looking at the Alhambra Palace and the great structures that are built there at Cordoba. So as we assess these early Islamic champions, what we find is that they had certainly some advantages. Islamic doctrine was a claim for a universal God, like Christianity. Their doctrine was simple. Their doctrine alleged to be tolerant of other faiths, particularly people of the book, like Jews and Christians. But at the same time, people who opposed their religion were subject to violence of the sword. And you'll find this in a number of places in the Quran. and people who didn't convert were required to pay additional taxes, and certainly not to blaspheme the Prophet Muhammad. And the armies of Islam were zealous. They had the advantage oftentimes of traveling light, and as they went to fighting, they didn't have a whole lot in the way of really powerful opponents early on. Again, as I mentioned, the Byzantines and Persians were both played out, and there were discontented populations that they could take advantage of. So this would contribute to their success. Now, as far as their doctrine contributing to their success, their belief was that if you died in jihad, seeking to advance the struggle of Islam to transform areas of Dar al-Harb, areas of conflict, into Dar es-Salam, places where Islam dominates, and there's peace in their terms, then the response was that you would go directly to paradise. And so this is the only way that one can actually be sure in Islam that one is going to receive the blessings of entrance into paradise, is that one dies in the struggle. So one's a martyr. And this would inspire many of these folks in their battles. Now, as far as their early expansion goes, they're limited in that they didn't have a great fleet. They didn't have siege material. Another limitation for early Islam here would be that there's internal divisions. We've identified already a rivalry over leadership. But also, there came to be ethnic tensions. Islam claimed to be a religion for people everywhere, but prayers should be said in Arabic, and so you have to go to Mecca to go on a pilgrimage, and so there are some ethnic tensions that existed, and eventually the Islamic community would see some division, particularly as we've seen already. You had those who were loyal to the Umayyads. This group is known as the Sunni, and those loyal to the House of Ali, the Shia. And so there will be factions that develop within Islam. Some of these early factions will continue on today. Then subsequently, as people would believe that there would be other prophets, we'll find that within Shia Islam that there are a number of divisions, and that there's other sects that emerge within Islam that recognize additional prophets other than Muhammad. The Sunni will recognize that Muhammad is the last of the prophets. He's the seal of the prophets. And so as a result, they won't recognize these other prophecies and that come from different prophets. So Islam certainly gets established and is spread widely. But what happens in the year 750 when the Umayyad Caliphate ends? It ends because that dynasty has had lots of civil wars of their own. But in the year 749, there was a terrible earthquake in the region, which devastated the region and weakened them, and breaks down urban life. And as a result, when the Umayyads are defeated, a new dynasty under Abu al-Abbas becomes the ruler of the Islamic world, and they move from their capital from Damascus, about 400 miles to the east, to Baghdad. This new dynasty is one that has a line of succession. The first several here will find that there's a consistent heir apparent, and so there's not some of the divisions that existed previously. And so this is going to be an advantage for this dynasty until a couple hundred years later, when there's going to be some challenges to them. They assimilated much of Byzantine bureaucracy and organization, but they're going to definitely be concerned when the Byzantines start to use coins with Christ on the coin, and so they'll certainly be making sure at that point in time to have their own non-iconic coinage. It'll usually be decorated with calligraphy. The Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad is able to build a great city in Baghdad and to see a number of cultural achievements. This is seen particularly in the time of their leader Harun al-Rashid. He's a contemporary of Charlemagne, who we'll talk about later. Harun al-Rashid rules from 786 until 809, and he's going to promote, for example, the House of Wisdom, the Beit al-Hikmah. This is a Jama, a school in Baghdad, and sometimes this is seen as another early university. So the Abbasid caliphs will promote scholarship and embrace learning from other people groups, and this will be something that they will benefit from, as they have certainly a much more culturally advantaged situation in Baghdad than the best things that existed in Western Europe at this point in time. Now, the Abbasids did not control all Islamic territory. They certainly controlled the area we know today as Iraq and into the Levant and down into Egypt. But far away in the west, the Umayyad Caliphate continued in what we know as Spain today. They're in Cordoba, particularly by Abd al-Rahman in the year 756. But other territories, like the area of Morocco, would be ruled over the Idrisids, and in Tunisia, you the Aghlabids, and over in the east, in the area of Iran, you have the Tahrids. And so there's a number of areas here within the Islamic world that are not directly ruled by the Abbasid Caliphate. In Egypt in the 10th century, in the 900s, what we're going to find is that Egypt will break away, led by descendants of Ali, and so the Shia will take over Egypt in what's known as Fatimid dynasty in Egypt, and they're going to be gaining their independence, project their influence over the area of the Levant, but there'll be a number of forces that come to challenge the Abbasids. An important one will be the coming of the Turks from up in Asia. We'll have the Seljuk Turks, which will take away territory and challenge the Byzantine Empire and disrupt things in the Levant. And this will help to spur on the coming of the Crusades that we'll talk about in a later lecture. After the Crusades, what we'll find is that in later Islamic world that we have the Ayyubid Caliphate, which is established around the year 1170 by Saladin, and that caliphate will continue on for some time until eventually the Mongols are going to particularly disrupt this later Islamic period, and the decline here will be pushed particularly by the Crusaders and the Mongols, as the Crusaders come in the 11th century and the Mongols come in the 13th century, and the result will be that there will not be nearly the same kind of long-distance trade and prosperity in the great cities of Cairo and Baghdad here in the east. So as we look at the influence of the Islamic world here, and particularly on Western civilization, what we find is that they would come to conquer a number of religious centers, and that would lead to the ascendance of Rome and Constantinople as rival cities like Antioch or Jerusalem and Alexandria fell under Islamic control. In the area of religion, one of the major influences that comes out of this, we'll see, is that the idea of jihad was something that the Crusaders in Europe are going to take up from Islam, the idea of going on a holy war where one goes and attacks one's enemies in the name of the Lord. Certainly there's influence that happens also in the Islamic world, as we see them observing 5 times a day, praying in a ritual manner. It sounds a lot like the monastic liturgical schedule that people observed. So there's influences that go back and forth, most certainly. Coming from the Arabs here at this time period, there will be contributions that come through a number of their writers. This will be particularly in the 11th, 12th, 13th century. a lot of that contact will come in the time period of the Crusades, where we'll find that they have preserved certain medical treatises that come from the classical world, and then they've added a lot of observation of their own. Certainly their medicine is going to be far superior to that of the Crusaders, the Franks, who come to the East, and they'll learn a lot about medicine. And so you have people like Ibn Rashid. He's also known in the West as Averroes, and Ibn Sina, a Persian man who's known as Avicenna. They're going to have a great deal of influence as they preserve knowledge from the classical world, from a variety of texts, and they'll bring these things back into European awareness. There were texts from Aristotle and other classical texts that these individuals' Arabic translations will bring back to the knowledge of the West during the Middle Ages. In the area of economics, the Arab world certainly maintained a few major urban centers in places like Alexandria and Baghdad and Cordoba. These would be the largest cities in the Western world at this point in time. And these would be maintained by people who sustained some of the things the Byzantines had going before, whether it's water systems to irrigate fields, or long-distance caravan trades over land routes, or the use of merchant vessels in the Mediterranean. So as we think about contributions that they make to Western civilization, one of the things that we get in Western civilization that comes from the Orient through the Muslim world is paper, this cheap writing material. It's certainly easier to get hold of than papyrus. You've got to have certain environments to grow papyrus, and it was certainly less expensive than parchment, where basically you're creating writing material that's able to absorb ink and to maintain a solid record, but it's made out of plant fibers, and you can make paper most anywhere. So this is going to be important new writing material that comes from the Orient by way of the Islamic world. Arabs who engage in trade will also bring ideas about mathematics, and so today we use Arabic numbers. What we're going to find is that Arabic numbers will be supplanted in the Orient, and they will move on to use Persian numbers. But there's a number of mathematical ideas that they developed which will be passed on to Western society. As far as other contributions that are made in the areas of science, they were particularly renowned for mathematics. In mathematics, they were interested in geometry and trigonometry, and some of this is seen in a number of places. They're interested in the world that Allah has made, and one of the places where this will go actually goes into artwork, where we'll find that they'll use a lot of geometric figures in their designs, sometimes on ceramics, where they use a lot of glazed work, and they use their calligraphy, their writing, as a piece of artwork on tiles that they might use to decorate things like mosques. So there's kind of a harmony here of they're interested in mathematics and geometry and use of the compass. But as far as science goes, I would say that astronomy is an important area, and again, Arabs have plenty of cloudless nights with which they can use to observe the stars. And in their observations, they observe many things, and they have their own names for the various stars. But in measuring these things, they develop the use of the sextant, and they're going to learn to navigate the deserts, and this will be something then that you can use as you navigate the waves of the ocean to discern where you are on the surface of the earth. And this will be something important that will come at a later time to Western Europe by way of the Arab world. So the Arab world does make a contribution to Western society. Much of that will come later on. A lot of what they bring is something that's transferred either from the classical world or from the Orient, where they act as sort of middlemen along the way. Something that will be a lasting influence, though, will be their idea of engaging in a holy war. Certainly we find that there had been discussion in the time of Augustine about a just war, but they take this to a new level that we'll find that the popes of the Middle Ages will embrace, and Urban II will call for the First Crusade. I thank you for your attention today. I pray that God is blessing you.